It's exciting to get to kick off our session today, tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing at NOAA and across the federal government in support of the 30 by 30 Conservation Initiative. Before I dig in, I'll just disclaim that usually I'm presenting very cool maps and apps and tools. This initiative is much more policy focused at this stage, so I apologize that I don't have as many cool graphics as I've seen already from others today. So it's a new niche for me. But hopefully this will start a conversation that will lead to some very cool developments of apps and tools that will support this really important initiative. So no further ado. Oh, there we go. America the Beautiful, some background. This is my day-to-day lately, and I imagine that it's not for some of you, so I figured I would give you a little bit of background. Early in this administration, our president signed the landmark climate executive order. And in it was the first reference that we had domestically to what was known internationally as the 30 by 30 Conservation Initiative. In the EO, President Biden noted our commitment as a nation to protecting 30% of our lands and waters by the year 2030, and really wrote to the effect of the importance of this for both our economy, for our health, and for our well-being. And that launched what is now known as the America the Beautiful Initiative. On domestically, as I mentioned, 30 by 30 is the sort of the way it's looked at in the international or global community. So after the EO came out a report entitled Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful. And this was sort of the implementation, the process of how we would get from the executive order laying out what we needed to do and actually how we were going to get there. So this decade-long campaign is the process of how we are going to work towards more locally led conservation and restoration of our lands and waters, and particularly with a focus on three threats: the loss of biodiversity, climate change, and inequitable access to nature. So I won't read through all of our the focus areas and the 8 core principles, but I think it's important to read into this how comprehensive this approach is. It's not just looking at how we are protecting and managing space, but looking at conservation much more broadly, trying to bring in underserved communities and provide access to nature, and to recognize efforts of conservation that maybe traditionally aren't seen in the public eye. And importantly, at the bottom there is to use science as a guide and to build on existing tools and strategies with an emphasis on adaptive approaches. So I think a lot of these terms weigh into and come into our geospatial world. And the most important part for me is the call to action included the development of a new tool, a new resource that required federal agencies to work together and through a process of a lot of public engagement, develop a resource that would help us track conservation across land and waters, that would integrate all these different resources that currently existed. Important to note that it was great to see some of our existing federal data assets, particularly the MPA inventory, which is what I manage, the Protected Area Database of the U.S., which is something that is managed by the USGS, which is another comprehensive way of looking at land management. Noting the incredible efforts that we've already put into these resources, but also noting the need to advance these and integrate these into a more comprehensive tool that brings in the contributions of farmers and other voluntary conservation measures, and particularly in the marine environment, the contributions of fisheries and other kinds of conservation strategies that manage our ocean space. So it took the concept of protected and broadened it to conserve. And what that does is put a big task in front of us as the consortium of federal agencies working on this, is to pool data and create a new and relevant resource that we can care and feed over time to track and measure progress in conservation. So in the nuts and bolts, particularly focused, mind you, here on the marine side, where we are is in that initial stage of what kind of data do we have and what does it look like? And what kind of attributes do we have? And for some of us in the geospatial world, we knew what assets were there. They're in the geo platform, these web services that we are aware of, that we've included in web apps and maps and tools. But the really valuable assets that Esri has provided us is the way to share these data with non-GIS users, and particularly those in leadership who need to be able to actually click on the data and understand what it is and what it isn't. So we've used story maps, a lot of different just web viewers to highlight the data that we currently have within NOAA that can help inform the next stages. And it's important to note that there's a federal interagency working group that's brought together all sorts of leads from the policy and the geospatial communities to work on the development of this atlas, both the data side and the requirements, and then of course the platform and its maintenance over time. And to make things even more interesting, of course, the terrestrial and the marine, and where they coalesce and meet. It's the first time we've tried to do that in a comprehensive way. That presents its own sets of challenges and opportunities. And important to note too is we're not just looking at boundaries for areas that are managed. We're actually looking at both what we're managing and how, but also what's the condition of those places. So the opportunities to look at not just where we are conserving or what areas are being managed, but what areas aren't. So this would help us to get at conservation opportunities. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of potential ingredients that could go into that side of the equation. So we had to set some requirements for national scale data, scale, scope, extent, as you can imagine, and initial data mining. I didn't want to do a demo for time, but I will say there's a link in here to a story map that we did create that highlights some of the complexities of cataloging area-based management in U.S. waters. There's a lot going on out there. We have a lot of areas from marine protected areas to fishery management areas to de facto protected areas to jurisdictional authorities. And I think highlighting this complexity will help us move along the trajectory of getting to a place where we can actually analyze and use these data to tell important and impactful stories about conservation. So initial perspectives, wow, we're rich with data. When I got into the GIS game, data was the limiting factor, and now we have too much. We have so much that we don't really know how to use it and translate it into meaningful stories. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges ahead of us is how do we take all that we know and turn it into something useful? And terminology really makes for trouble. There's been a lot of conversation on the trajectory of, or the definition of terms. And I think that really what we're trying to do, instead of to categorize areas, we're trying to map the continuum of places that contribute to conservation. And maps are a great place to start. Like when you think of what an atlas is, it's a book of maps. But really, we need to start thinking about how we take maps and turn them into engagement tools so that we can work with communities and the public to see how they have opportunity to advance conservation in their area, connect the people to the place. So those are some of my initial perspectives. And as I wrap up, just the next steps. This is a super public process. It's lengthy, it's decade long. There's lots of opportunities for public comment. The NOAA public comment period is open until the end of the year, and there are listening sessions scheduled to learn more about the process and the intent and the goals and the principles. Our working group is underway. And as I said, there's many opportunities that will continue to engage formally and informally with tribes, through and other the American public and stakeholders through various different avenues. Thanks for your time.